Welcome to another episode of Finders Keepers, the podcast that helps you find the best keepers for your keeper and dynasty leagues. I'm your host Jordox, and round 24 of the AFL season was grand final week in the fantasy world. Hopefully you were able to claim some silverware and are now celebrating the fruits of all your hard labour. There is no better feeling than when it's all said and done. The draft, the trading, the waivers, the looping, the agonising over whether to take your VC score or go for more, the being hooked to your phone for news updates, injury reports, scoring trends, the podcasts, the articles, the hours of conversations with your friends, the angst you get from your significant other for being distracted over the weekend. At the end of it all, you stand taller than all of your mates, holding the cup. I wasn't so fortunate this year. I fell just short in my home league grand final, losing to a mighty side in the J Masters, coached by my mate Jared, and he's gone back-to-back in our league now, and you should see this guy's midfield. It reads like an end-of-season completed classic sides midfield. So a shout out to him for another great season. I was pretty pleased to get there though. Just making the grand final is a big effort in itself, and I'm pretty optimistic my squad's chances for the next few years. So here we are, the last in-season episode of Finders Keepers for 2025. There's lots to get through. I'll be going through the things I noticed across the round itself. I'll touch on my waiver picks from last week, but obviously won't be offering any up to you this week because it's all over. Got a question that's come in that I'll answer as well, and then towards the end of the podcast, I'm going to reveal the winner of the competition I've been running here on Finders Keepers for a spot in a keeper league with me next year. So I'll get through all of that and more, and then wrap up what has been a pretty exciting first season of Finders Keepers. So onto the footy itself for one last time in 2025. And it started Thursday night with yet another Essendon game. The Bombers love their Thursday nights this year. And they took on Carlton in what was a pretty entertaining game. And I must say, if you're an Essendon fan and you're feeling pretty average about how this year's gone, I know you've lost like 11 in a row, but I've been so impressed by the Bombers' endeavour and fight in every game they've been in. Clearly undermanned. Pretty much their whole squad has been injured. I reckon they'll be okay next year. But Carlton won, and they had to finish with some good momentum, and they've done just that. So I think both sides should be fairly optimistic about next year. Now, for the Bombers, Isaac Kako, he's had a bit of a run in the middle the last few weeks and has looked pretty good. Hasn't really hit a score until this week. A 94, he had 19 touches, kicked 2 goals, and he was actually one of their main guys in the middle. Merritt was a bit more forward this week, I think. Anyway, Kako, what a great year. He's played every game in his debut, mostly as a small forward, and now last few weeks has shown he might be all right in the midfield as well. Pretty exciting prospect for the future. And speaking of which, Angus Clark, another great score from him, 2 weeks in a row. He put up a 101 with his 27 touches, finishing the year with a 98 and a 101. It's pretty good signs for next year. I know the Bombers will get a lot of names back, but I think they really like Clark in that distributing role back there. And Mason Redmond's had a big finish to the year, averaging 103 in his last 6 games. Put up a 119 in this game, and just so much of the ball has been fed through him in the absence of guys like Ridley and Zach Reed and all those guys they're missing. Something occurred to me watching this game. Redmond reminds me of Brendan Goddard, sort of in the way he looks and sort of in the way he plays, but I think he can have a similar finish to his career that Goddard had as a big fantasy relevant guy out of the back line. And I don't know how it looks when everyone's fit, but Redmond's always had the potential to be a fantasy gun. And yeah, I reckon he could go on with it next year. For Carlton, Francis Evans, what a few weeks he's had. From being only owned by 1% of keeper and dynasty leagues on the keeper fantasy platform just a few weeks ago, he's had a big few weeks, and he looked unreal. He kicked 3 goals, scored a ton, 103, and I think he's a much better player than I actually thought he was. So I'm not saying he's going to be a fancy guy necessarily. I think he's in a bit of a purple patch, but just in terms of being best 22 for the Blues moving forward, I think after this performance, I'd be pretty surprised if he wasn't. And then lastly, Billy Wilson. He showed a bit off halfback in this game, and I've liked him. I've liked the look of him in his first handful of games at the level, but he hasn't put up a score until this week. He hit an 85, and again, he's someone I'd like to keep an eye on next year. On to Friday night, we had the double header, and we had 2 cracking games of footy. The first one was Collingwood-Melbourne, and it looked like an upset was going to be on the cards. Melbourne were leading late in the game too, but Collingwood with a top 4 spot on the line found what they needed and prevailed in a great game. I think Melbourne looked great. Like, obviously they've got the caretaker coach. They're going to get a new coach in next year. It's going to be a bit of a shake-up at the Ds. I think they could be they could go up the ladder quicker than probably what we'd think. It's sometimes a new coach can just have that effect. Anyway, for the Pies, Dan Houston, good finish to a pretty underwhelming season for him. He scored 89. Looked like he was on the wing for parts of this game again, but did end up in his usual role at half-back, took some kick-ins, and I think I think he'll be better next year. I said it last week. I think he'll be a lot better next year for those who are pretty worried about him. And that was it for the Pies. For Melbourne, though, Trent Rivers, I've been talking about this, feel like all year. When are we going to see him put into the midfield? Now, he had a taste last week, but this week he played mostly midfield. And we saw Keziah Pickett, Christian Petrarca spend a lot more time forward. Now, Petrarca's been forward a fair bit lately, but it was first time I've seen Keziah Pickett used a lot more forward than he has been. Anyway, Rivers had a big game in the midfield. Look, he was quiet, but he was really prolific in the last quarter and scored a 75. If I had to pick where he plays next year, I still can't tell you because I thought it would be midfield this year. But who knows? That new coach might come in and say straight away, you're a midfielder. The other Friday night game saw quite the upset with Port Adelaide just getting over Gold Coast. And this was just such a great watch. I am a Crows fan, so it's not too often a Port Adelaide victory gets me up and about, I'll be honest. But the way Port played and beat the Suns, doing it for a legend in Travis Boak and Ken Hinkley, who I know is probably a polarising figure for the Port Adelaide faithful, but whatever you think of him, it was great to see him finish on a high note with Boak by his side. And of course, Rory Atkins as well retired, not with quite the same amount of fanfare as Boak and Hinkley, but he was a very good player, at least when he was at the Crows, Atkins. Good memories of him. It was a really bad loss for Gold Coast. They needed to win that to seal their first ever finals appearance, and that now goes to the extra game against Essendon, rescheduled from opening round, which will take place this week, and they have to beat the Bombers to play finals, and I think they will. For Port Adelaide, it was the Butters and Rosie show. A huge performance from the captain and vice-captain. I just thought it was so telling and so promising for Port Adelaide's future that their 2 leaders stood up in this game. Butters with a 152, Rosie with a 142, and Rosie spent most of the game in the midfield instead of his halfback role that he has been playing. They were just everywhere, the 2 of them, and they just willed Port Adelaide across the line. And the retirement man himself, Travis Boak, finished with a 94, And that's 4 90-plus scores in a row to finish his career. And what a career it's been. Congratulations to him. That's he sits 7th in the all-time games played record, which is incredible. And actually number 1 for interstate players, games played. Sean Burgoyne played more, but he played at Hawthorn as well as an interstate side. So well done, Pokey. On to Gold Coast. Braden Fiorini, he popped up and would have been very handy in grand finals this week. A 117, playing mostly on the wing, up against one of Port's debutants, McKinlay, who was great, by the way. And yeah, Fiorini tried all game, and he finishes with an 87 average, which I don't think I would have predicted if you told me, yes, Fiorini's going to play, but it'll be mostly wing. Wouldn't have picked an 87 average, so credit to him. And then Sam Flanders with a 22 as the starting sub, and gee, I'm not saying anything that is too outlandish here, but his future at Gold Coast must be a bit cloudy right now. I mean, if you go back to the bye and there was talk of Vic clubs coming for him, Damien Hardwick said, nah, don't bother, he's part of our future, he's part of our midfield plan. We've barely seen him in the midfield, if at all, and this game was win and Gold Coast plays finals for the first time in their history. So there was a fair bit on the line, and Flanders was only the starting sub. I have no idea what's going on there. I almost wonder if when the season's done, we find out he's been carrying some sort of injury and they didn't want to put him on ice. They just want to keep playing him. But very strange. The fact that he plays so deep forward and doesn't get on the ball is weird. The fact that he was their starting sub in such a crucial game, even weirder. On to Saturday, and the early game was North Melbourne and Adelaide, and I trekked on down to Marvel Stadium for this one. Was hoping it would be a comfortable win for the Crows, but North Melbourne were really good, and they kept us sweating the whole day. But yeah, Crows won and finished top of the ladder, which is just incredible effort, and very proud of the club and all that, but we've got bigger fish to fry, as they say. For North Melbourne, Tristan Sherry, and he is Finders Keepers Player of the Week for his 12 kicks, 13 handballs, 3 marks, 12 tackles, 35 hitouts, and a 154. Now, this isn't surprising for Cherry of last year, but we haven't seen a lot of it this year from him. He's had an interrupted year with niggles, and then he had that suspension recently. But this is just Cherry at his best. And I was there and I watched, and I didn't think he'd go big this week up against Riley O'Brien. He's just a monster, Cherry. Like, he dominated O'Brien at times, and his physical presence with the tackling is just, it's another level. It's something I've never really seen from a ruckman before. So yeah, you'd be pretty excited for next year. I reckon we'll see more of this side of Sherry than we did for most of the season. And what a final fortnight he had. He would have won a lot of coaches their prelim and grand final. 165 last week, 154 this week, and he's laid 30 tackles in that time. Obscene numbers. What a gun. Cooper Trembath played his third game. He's one of the mid-season draftees that North got this year. Scored a 76, but he looked really good. Like, this is his third game, and he's kicked 3 goals in every game he's played. And again, being at the ground, watching him up close, he just was reading it so well for someone who's just arrived. I reckon North have struck gold there. He's going to be a good player. Jai Simpkin had a great finish to the season, considering he had little to no centre bounces. In fact, his role has really been interesting. He's averaging 103 in his last 4 games for the year, and that's with, almost no centre bounces. So he put up 113 in this game, was great, was everywhere. And, he's a really curious player to me. I thought if he wasn't going to be a pure mid, his value would be gone. But with forward status and with his ability to score off the flank and off the wing, maybe he's got another couple of big years in him yet, which would be so handy for owners because, well, of that forward status. For the Crows, just a quick mention for one of my favourites, Riley Thilthorpe. A huge game, dominated from the start and put up a big 120 to cap off a fantastic fantasy season from him. Very excited about the next decade really of him dominating, hopefully, for the Crows. And Sid Draper came in, and it was exciting to see him get another go before finals. But yeah, he didn't really have an impact. Scored 16 and was subbed off in the third. But he's a first-year player, playing for the top side. I would be panicking. He's going to be a gun. So for those who drafted him this year, don't just look at his scores and his average, because there were lots of games where he was the sub. Trust me, this guy's going to be a gun. Later that day, we had Richmond and Geelong, and this went pretty much according to script, in that Geelong had a comfortable win. Perhaps the script that wasn't followed was, the big, massive scores that clubs have been putting against this Richmond midfield. I thought the Cats would have gone big, but not a heap of them did. For Richmond, this is really interesting. They had 8 different players take a kick in. And you don't see that very often. You usually have, your 2 or 3, and then maybe a handful will take 1 or 2. But 8 different players had a crack at it, and none took more than Sam Banks. And what a breakout season he's had. Finishing with a 121, thanks to 10 marks. He'd be one of the finds of the year in keeper leagues, because there are a lot of Richmond names at the start of the year that could have possibly stepped up and taken on this halfback role. And so if you grab Banks before he started doing this, you'd be doing absolute cartwheels. For Geelong, Tom Atkins, he top scored with a 120, and he just deserves a mention, breaking the most tackles in a season with 205, averaging 9 a game, and he laid another 9 in this game. So anyone that can tackle like that has got a great scoring base, and he ended up averaging, I think, high 80s, which is pretty good as well for him. Max Holmes, bit of a disappointing finish to what was a huge season for him. Just his last few weeks, just scored, I think, around the 80s. Scored 87 in this game. Moved to half-back in the second half, which is interesting. He's been, he does a bit of both, but he had been more midfield for some time. So he was just off half-back in the second half, and, perhaps he didn't get a look of it, because I know the Cats were dominating from what I could tell. And then lastly for them, Bailey Smith with a 108, and he finishes with the prestigious honour of being the highest averaging player in the league in the fantasy world with a 116, and pretty incredible comeback from a knee injury. I think we forget that because he's the new recruit and he's our new club. But let's not forget, he missed all of last season with an ACL. So to come out, average 116, he'll be right up there in the Brownlow as well. It's just a huge season, and owners would have enjoyed very much having him back with the forward status, but that'll be gone next year, I'm sure. Saturday night was West Coast versus Sydney. And kind of like Richmond and Geelong, I think a lot of people were pretty big on Sydney players to finish off with a bang. And West Coast were all over it early. They were ahead from what I could see for large chunks in that first half. But then I was out Saturday night and I didn't see anything from halftime onwards. And when I checked the final scores, Sydney had just smashed them. So, I think we've seen a bit of that from West Coast, this young group putting together good quarters here and there and then falling away. Brady Hoff put up an 87, and this was his third game in a row playing purely in the back line. It's going to be a really interesting watch next year where he lines up. I still think he can be a goer in fantasy. I'd just like to see them land on a role for him instead of bouncing between the two and not playing lockdown defensive mid or lockdown defender, because he can score when he's free. For Sydney, Errol Goulden spent more time on the ball this week as opposed to the wing. And so more centre bounces than he's had all season. And he had 36 touches, 10 marks, 2 goals, scored 133. Just a nice little reminder for Goulden owners. Yes, this year wasn't great because he was injured, came back, didn't really put up a heap of big scores. This was just a bit of a taste of what I think you can expect when he's fit and raring to go from next year onwards, which is pretty exciting. Tom Papley popped a huge score. He got a 131. Huge game. He's been having little runs in the middle at times in games, but this week he had 36% of the centre bounces, which really got him involved in the game. Kicked 3 goals, and I reckon was probably a big reason why the Swans went big and ran over the top of the Eagles. And lastly, Brodie Grundy had an 89. He had 50 hit-outs, which saved him from a pretty poor score. So it was a quiet finish for him. But, he's coming off that week off with a concussion, and he still finishes the season with an average of 107. And that includes that crazy run where he went at 127 average between rounds 9 and 21. Can he replicate it next year? That's a good question. And I think watching the way that Gawn has gone on with it well into his 30s, I think if Grundy's fit and all good, I'd expect another big year from him in 2026. On to Sunday, and GWS took on St Kilda in a very early game on Sunday. And the Saints, like they've done many times this year, were very competitive in the game. The Giants just kicked away at the very end there to hold on to a very tight win. Important for the Giants to get that win too, just so they can get the home final. Harry Rowston scored a 77. I'm loving this kid. He started forward again. Last week he was forward, kicked the 4 goals. Started forward again, but then went onto the ball in the second half because Cornelio was subbed out with his concussion. And Rowston, playing on ball, scored nearly 50 points in the second half. So, great season from him. And he'll be pretty commonly owned by now. But, if he's available in your redrafts next year, I think he's going to be a great pick. Lachie Whitfield, just credit to him for another huge season. The veteran put up a 129 in this game and just delivered when you really needed it most. He scored 81 points in the second half to finish with a bang. And it's another big year from him, and it's impressive that his scoring is maintained because we've got Lockie Ash, who's broken out this year and is ready to take over as the main man. But the two of them together both had big years, and Whitfield didn't put up any of his huge ceiling scores. I think he had a whopper earlier in the year against the Crows. But his consistency and the trust you can have in a player like that almost no matter what will get you to a ton. And then on some days, he'll go even bigger. For St Kilda, Darcy Wilson finished the year an underwhelming year for, a second-year player, but I think in the keeper league world, I think we're all expecting a bit more from him this year. But he finished with his first ton of the year, a career-high score of 106. Kicked 5 goals too, if you don't mind. And he was huge for the Saints in that second half. So, look, I think finishing in that sort of form will be great for his confidence. And I'm still very bullish. He's going to be a great player for us and for St Kilda. And, wouldn't be surprised to see a big improvement starting next year, which would be his third. Jack McRae scored 34 as the starting sub. And this had been coming. I mean, this would have killed so many sides on the Sunday to have Macrae as the starting sub. But I don't know. I feel like the writing was almost on the wall. Just with those weeks leading in, we saw Jack Steele as a starting sub a few weeks ago. Macrae's time on ground last week was 55%, which is just basically what a sub might even have. So I wasn't all that surprised to see it. But I guess it raises the question now, how does he fit in next year? The young mids are coming through at St Kilda. Windhager has had a brilliant season. Garcia has shown a bit. Wanganeen Miller is pretty handy. Don't know if you've heard of him. And hopefully they can get poor Mateus Filippo healthy. I mean, he had a calf issue on the weekend and was subbed out. This guy has just had such a rough run. If he can have a good run in the summer, come back healthy, I have no doubt he'll be looked at and put in the midfield as well. So guys like Steele, Macrae, obviously Zach Jones and those guys are on the way out, but it's going to be a different look, I think, for St Kilda. And of course, if you believe everything you read, they're going to have Tom de Koning as well. So what does that mean for Rowan Marshall? I think fair bit of change coming up for the Saints, which will be a good thing for them. Cooper Sharman, he's finished the season really well. He scored 82 in this game, backing up scores of 97 and 93. Just reckon he's someone to keep an eye on when you're doing your redraft for keepers, as I think he's about 25 years old. So, yeah, he might be more of a consistent scorer than we thought, especially if the Saints improve next year. The Bulldogs at Freo, huge game. It was pretty much a case of winner plays finals, loser probably doesn't. And I didn't get to catch this one. I was hoping to, but I tracked it and it looked like the Bulldogs were in control in the first quarter. Just couldn't make it count on the scoreboard. And then once Freo got their game going, they were irresistible, I reckon. So well done to the Dockers. They're in. And the Bulldogs might be in, but they will need Essendon to upset Gold Coast if that's to be a chance. Marcus Bontempelli, 141. Not much else can be said about this guy. I mean, he's just an absolute star in the real stuff and in the fantasy world. He would have been a pretty popular captain choice this week too in many grand finals, and he didn't let them down. Scored 53 points in that last quarter to finish with the 141, like I said. And he finishes as the highest averaging midfielder in the game and the third highest player in the game with a 111 average. Joel Freyer had a big finish as well. He finished on 94 after a 54-point last quarter, which included a couple of goals. I think he was pretty important as the Bulldogs nearly pulled the Dockers lead back. And just finishing a great year from him. I know he was a bit frustrating for owners because he started so hot and then he was a bit inconsistent, but he'll be a third-year player next year, and I think it's only going to improve, Freya. And then for Freo, just Shea Bolton. I mean, he put up an 85, spent more time in the midfield than he has in recent weeks. And yeah, it's an interesting first year as a Docker. I think from a fantasy perspective, you'd say a disappointing first year. But I don't know, I reckon Freo fans would be pretty happy with him in the real stuff. And, kind of similar to Dan Houston and lots of players who shift clubs at that point in their career, it can take a year or two for them to really get going. So watch for him to go to another level next year. The final game on Sunday night, another great game in terms of the effect on the finals. Brisbane and Hawthorn. Winner makes top four, loser doesn't. Really high stakes. And it was a great game, entertaining game. Brisbane, very inaccurate, nearly cost them. Hawks were plucky, but Brisbane got them at the end. Zach Bailey continued in his midfield role and scored well again. He scored a 97. And look, his last three games, he's played a lot of midfield minutes because Lachie Neale's been out. And he's averaged 108 in those 3 weeks. I wonder if they look at it next year as more of a permanent thing, because he's such a dynamic player, Bailey. I really like him running through the guts, and I don't own him in any of my keepers, but if I did, I'd be very much hoping that they try it again next year. Who knows? He could have a big final series playing as a midfielder, and that might be all we need to see for them to do it again. Cam Rayner, he went bang in the last quarter, so he didn't touch it in the first quarter and then finished with 53 in the last quarter, including 2 massive goals. And it's been a really great finish to the year from him, a really good, consistent run in the second half of the year. And his role's been the same, that high forward, gets up the ground, chops out a little bit at sound of bounces, and he's just really becoming the player that we thought he would. For Hawthorn, just the one mention, and that's Jack Ginnivan with a 92. And, he got dropped earlier in the season to the VFL. Since then, he's played 17 games straight, averaging 84. And he's just a really great player to have, because for a player that plays that role, he's got a pretty high floor. I know he had a pretty low score a few weeks ago, but overall he's been very consistent and just someone you can trust. I remember there was a point when he was at Collingwood, he had a couple of big games, and I remember thinking, this guy could be someone for keeper leagues. And I think I grabbed him, but it didn't last. I let him go. We really started to see it this season, and I reckon he can go on with it next year and be a great option for now and the future. All right, for the last time this year, I'm going to look back at the waiver wire picks from last week and see how my suggestions went. Hopefully you grab one of these guys and that helped take you to the flag. So I did 5 names. One was Angus Clark. He was at 51% ownership at the time. That's gone up slightly. And if you did that and looped him, you'd be very happy with his work. A 101. And I think what's great about him, and if you did grab him, is I think you could keep him. So not only did you get a ringer for your grand final who dropped a ton, I actually think if you can keep him on your lists, you should. Because, I spoke about him earlier in the episode. That role suits him off halfback, and yes, Essendon have a lot of names to come back, but I don't know. I think he's shown enough, and we'll see in the off-season just where he sits, but pretty bullish on his chances of being, pretty handy to have back there. The other one was Dylan Shield at the opposite spectrum, end of the spectrum in terms of careers. Now, he was at 73% ownership, coming back in what was tipped to be his last game, but they've got the game against the Suns. Anyway, I treated it like it was a farewell game, was pretty optimistic of what he could do playing midfield, and he dropped a ton as well, a 102. Fantastic reward for anyone who jumped on him. That's probably where the good ones end. Jack Martin I nominated as well. He was at 65% ownership. I guess I was just a bit excited about the Richmond matchup and his ability to go. Well, he scored a ton against them earlier in the year. He was coming off an 88. And I thought he was a really good chance, but wasn't his day. 65 he scored. Isaac Cumming, he was at 66% ownership when I suggested him last week. He just had a couple of really good scores staying on the wing, and I thought against North at Marvel he could probably rack up, but he had a quiet one with 55. And then the last one was Beau McCreary, who was more a tip for those deeper leagues. He was at 13% ownership, but he didn't have a great role. He wasn't in the midfield as much as I thought he would be Friday night, and he scored 53. So that's it for the waiver wires for this year. Obviously, there's none to look at for this week because the season's over. But I hope I've brought you some names this year that have either helped you with an important win, or they've been players that you've held on to and help you for many years to come. Now, getting closer to the end of the episode, there's a few more things I want to run through. I actually got a question sent in this week on X from @Ethan_Prendy. And he's put a few through to me this year. So thanks for your support, mate. Thanks for listening. And he says, hey, brother, thought I might hit you with one last question for the final pod. What are your thoughts on these underperforming players this year? I'm tossing up what to do with them, trade if it's a good deal, or just hold and expect them to get better. And then he says, I'm into the final day of my grand final. So this was on the weekend. There's 6 points separating us with identical types of players left, praying I can get it done. Thanks for all your work this year. It's been a true asset. Thanks, mate. That's really great to hear. And I have messaged him, but let me know, how'd you go? Did you hold on? I hope so. Anyway, the three names he wanted me to look at, and they're great names because anyone who owns these guys will be having the same thoughts. Dan Houston, Kieran Briggs, Jordan Ridley. I'll start with Houston, and I've talked about him a bit in the last couple of weeks as a guy who will probably benefit in the second year at a new club. His role didn't really change from what it was at Port Adelaide, but I think the game style was different. And yeah, he just wasn't, he just didn't demand the footy. He just got it when he needed to. The last couple of weeks he's been on a wing and a lot more involved. I think Collingwood, they're obviously finished top four and they could well win the flag. But I think next year, if they can get him going and get him into more of his natural play and a bit more like he did at Port Adelaide, he's such a great user of the ball. It's not about accumulating, it's about him getting lots of the pill because he's very good at using it. I reckon he improves next year. I don't think you're going to get much in a trade. If you can hold on to him, I would. Kieran Briggs, he had a real off year. I was so bullish about him as one of the best young rucks to have. But he never really got going this year. Had some good games, but, looking at his score build, plenty of hit-outs, no issue there, but just not much in the way of presence around the ground, not a lot of marks. But I think the thing we're forgetting with Briggs is he's still only 25. He's only played, I was just looking at it, he's only played 69 games. So in terms of the ruck, in terms of ruck ages, he's still a baby. Now, Nick Madden got a look this year, and I think he looked pretty good. So I think as he continues to develop, he'll keep pushing Briggs, and the two of them will, be competing for that spot. So I actually think Briggs is a hold as well. In fact, much more than Houston, because, like I said, a 25-year-old ruckman is a baby, and I still think he's going to be good. He just had an off year. I reckon hold him if you can. And then the last one is a player very close to my heart, Jordan Ridley. And he's close to me because we have the same first name. I always enjoy players with that. But no, I've always enjoyed Ridley. From his breakout, sort of 2020, 2021, I was onto him early. And I've got him in both my keeper leagues. But it is at getting to that sort of fork in the road. As a keeper owner, how many years can you carry this guy when he's just always getting injured? So I think if you could get a trade and it was reasonable, you'd do it. I'm tossing up whether I keep him next year. I think, in fact, I know as a definitive statement, when he's not injured, he is a gun. And he's a fantasy jet. He's exactly what you want in terms of takes kick-ins, loves those plus sixes, is the distributor, and, he can play tall and key position, but that's just more opportunity for intercept marking. It's just if he can get his body right. And it's hard too, because it's not always the same injury. It's not like it's the same knee or the same... He gets these different ones and then he'll get concussed, and he's just always something. So I reckon if you can squeeze him as your last man, I'd keep him. But But I completely understand if you're done with him and you drop him, because that's possibly where I'm at myself. So if I was to rank them in order of players I'd like to own, it'd probably be Briggs number 1, and then I think Houston still. I just think he can get back to it. And then Ridley, who I love, but I'm just yet to see him do it for a long period of time without injury. Hope that helps, Ethan. I hope you won your grand final. And hopefully anyone else listening who has those players and is weighing up what to do has taken a bit out of what I've said as well. Thanks, Ethan. And thanks heaps for your support this year as well. Another quick one came from Aaron Bowler at AsBowler on X, and he said, "Hey Jordox, can you please try to list the top forwards for next year? Would like to plan ahead for keeper draft." Absolutely, Aaron, but it won't be for a little bit. After this, I'm going to take a bit of a break, and then I will be back, don't worry, and I'll be doing the rankings for all the positions, which for those who've been listening all year is how I started. I started with ranking defenders, midfielders, rucks, forwards, and then got cracking onto the season. So I'll be doing that again, but we'll definitely be doing them earlier than I did this year, and you'll have plenty of time to prep for your redrafts. So thanks for the question, Aaron, and that is it. So thank you everyone who wrote in questions this year. It's my favourite part of the podcast, particularly when you send through trades for me to review. Really appreciate everyone who's written in this year. Looking forward to hearing from you again next year. Now, before we do wrap up things, there's just the little matter of the competition that I've been running here on Finders Keepers. And the competition was simply to send in your best, worst or craziest trade you've seen in a keeper league. And you would go in for a chance to be in a keeper league with me next year. One of the leagues I'm in is called Coaches Keepers. One of our coaches has departed. So we've got a side ready for a new coach. And let's find out who that new coach is going to be. Should I put in a drum roll effect? No, I'm not going to bother doing that. The winner of the competition and the new coach in Coaches Keepers with me next year is Holmes is where the heart is at PatrickDan71167 on X. Well done, Patrick. Very excited to have you on board. Send me a message on X and get in touch, and we'll get you set up in our league, get you in the group chat. I'll get your email address and all the details and go through all the important bits. But well done, mate. Thanks for entering the competition, and yeah, looking forward to having you. Well, looking forward to going head to head against you next year. So Holmes is where the heart is. The trade that he put in was a few weeks ago. In fact, when you message me, Patrick, please tell me how the contending team got on in the finals. Because in his league, this is the trade he sent through. The contending team traded in this trade, got McCluggage, Hewitt, Merritt, Chad Warner, and Jeremy Cameron, and gave up Nick Dacos to a rebuilding team. And it caused a lot of heated debate in their group chat, I'm sure. So, yeah, I mean, that trade is crazy to me to give up that much for just one player. And even the commissioner in that league, I don't know if I'd be... I don't know. Every league's different, but that is a crazy trade. But I want to know, did it pay off? Did the contending team win the flag? Because if you've gained McCluggage, Hewitt, Merritt, Warner and Jezza and you don't win the flag, you're pretty stiff, I reckon. So thanks, Pat. Well done. Get in touch with me, mate. We'll get you set up with the rest of the guys in Coaches Keepers. And with that, we have arrived at the end of the last episode for the season. And I did want to put in some thank yous and just spruik the resources that I use to research the content for this podcast, because there's a couple of really handy websites that I use and they deserve all the credit in the world. First one is an old favourite, fanfooty.com.au. Now, for those who have been playing the game a very long time. Now, I don't know if I'm old enough quite to say back in my day, but back in my day, before you had the internet on your phone, the earlier days of Dream Team was very different. You wouldn't have the scores. You'd have to get the paper the next day, and I used to read it at work on the weekends and add up all the columns and work out what they would have scored. And you didn't even get the result until the Monday. In fact, I actually remember, I was such a nerd back then, still am, I created a spreadsheet on Excel where you just had to enter in how many kicks, handballs, marks, tackles, yada, yada, yada a player had, and it would spit out their Dream Team score. And I thought it was so cool, and I shared it with all my friends, and then fanfooty.com.au came along and just changed it for everyone. I remember the early days of watching the footy, and then there'd be a goal, so you get an ad. I'd run out of the room, run to the computer room, look at Fan Footy, refresh, see what the scores were, run back. I remember I used to do my girlfriend's head in at the time, back in the day. Anyway, Fan Footy now is an incredible resource, not just for tracking scores live, but I use it to research this podcast because it gives you a little bit of a hint of role changes and interesting notes. It's got the heat map on it now. It's got the time on ground. It's got quarter-by-quarter splits. It's fantastic. And yeah, I spend every Monday writing the podcast with that open. The other one I use is dfsaustralia.com. Again, a fantastic resource for the fantasy world. And that's where I get all the centre bounce, kick in, time on ground. Like a heap of the stuff that I use is directly from that website. So huge credit to DFS Australia as well. And then the AFL app, I mean, we all use it, but I use it a lot for this pod as well, just to get the little specific things I need. So yeah, they're the main resources. And then just a few thank yous. And I'm not going to do this every year, but just, it's a big deal to start your own podcast. And I couldn't have done it without the help of MJ from the coaches panel, who not only gave me the support and the guidance on how to do a podcast, but gave me the confidence to do it as well. He's a good man, MJ, does great work over at the coaches panel, really knows his fantasy, but he's an even better bloke. Ryan, the great Ryan from Keeper Fantasy, who has changed so much for so many this year, and I think we're all in love with the Keeper Fantasy platform. Seeing the improvements from week to week, the new updates, the new features, the sky's the limit. And yeah, I'm so pumped that Ryan has done this project. And so I thank him for that, obviously. We all do. But a big thank you for, listening to the feedback I've given for the platform, which included the ownership percentages, which originally showed the ownership across the whole app, which would include single season draft comps, and it wouldn't give you the data you needed. So once that change was made, I think having the ownership percentages has really helped with the waiver wire segment, and yeah, I thank him for that. And then lastly, I had a few guests on with me this year. Huge thank you to them for giving up their time. I had Kane in the pre-season from the coaches panel, Jordan DeSena, who's just an absolute legend, and Free Kick Liam, a good man as well. And I think next year I'll try and get guests on a bit more. It certainly breaks up the pod to have another voice and not just me yammering on and on, but we'll see how that goes. So thank you to all those people, and go check out those resources I talked about. They're just a wealth of information, and I couldn't have done this without any of them. And lastly, a huge, and I really mean this, a huge thank you to you, the listener. Whether you just listened to a couple of episodes or you've listened from the very start of the year, the fact that you trust me to bring you the info you need to succeed in this game that we all love so much is very humbling. And I, every time I've seen people write in with feedback on the pod and how much they've enjoyed it, honestly, it just motivates me to make it bigger and better. So thank you very much. If you do like the podcast, please share it with your friends. Go and find the page on X at FindKeepAFL. Give it a follow and stay up to date with everything the podcast is doing across the summer and into the new season. Now, this is the last episode of the season, but I do have a little bit of a surprise, a bit of a treat. I've got a bonus episode I'm going to release next week that will be a bit of a season review, and I will have a guest with me. You'll just have to wait and see who that is, though. But in the meantime, this is the end of the in-season series of Finders Keepers, and it's been an absolute pleasure. So thank you. I will talk to you again soon. But in the meantime, for the last time this season, I'm Jordox. This has been Finders Keepers, and until next time, keep on keeping on.